Welcome to Compassionate Conversations, where we push the boundaries of comfort to empower you to become all that you dream of being. I am thrilled to be here again with Maryanne Pope, who has been on the show before. If you haven't checked it out, we talked before in depth about highly sensitive people and noise sensitivity. I will leave the link to this very popular episode in the show notes. Maryanne Pope is the author of A Widow's Awakening. She also writes blogs, screenplays, and play scripts. She is the chair of the John Petropoulos Memorial Fund and CEO of Pink Gazelle Productions, Inc. You can find her information in the show notes. She also happens to be one of my closest and dearest friends for over 20 years. Welcome back, Maryanne.
Thank you for having me, Esther.
Yes, it is a thrill. So today I wanted you back because I think you are the leading expert in my life on grief and loss.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have never met anybody in my life, I think, that at such a young age who has gone through so much grief and loss. And you're just such a beacon for me. You teach me so much about how to handle loss. And I've watched you grieve, and oh my gosh, you're incredible. So yeah. I want to start with the story of how we met. And by the way, A Widow's Awakening is a brilliant book that you wrote following your the love of your life, John's early death. And we're going to get in depth about that today. So I think the story of how we met is pretty profound. Yeah.
Absolutely. Do you want me to tell it or do you want to tell it?
Well, I'll just say my piece and then how about you add yours? Okay.
Perfect.
So it was I got married in 2000. So I guess it was 2000 and it would have been the fall, I guess, of 2000. And I was planning my wedding to Nathaniel, who is Maryanne's good friend as well. So that's how I got to know you. You were Nathaniel's very close friend in Calgary, and you'd known him for years, since you were 19 or something. And he invited you and John to our wedding, and I'd never met either of you. And I was very excited to get to know you. And just before our wedding, I think it was literally days before our wedding, the phone rang and I picked it up and it was you, and you said, "Hi, is this Esther?" And I said, "Yes." And you said, "I'm Maryanne." I said, "Oh, that's so nice." And I was so thrilled that you called, but you said, "I'm so sorry, I can't come to your wedding." And I said, "Why not?" And you said, "Well, unfortunately, my husband, John, just died." And I just felt like my stomach go to my feet. And I had never met you before. I didn't even know what you looked like. And we sat on the phone, I think it was for a couple hours. Either it was that day or another day, but it was like my life journey with my soulmate was just beginning.
Yeah.
And your life journey with your soulmate had ended with his death. I mean, it's never ended, right? But it was such a powerful crossover for both of us, I think. And we had the most intense spiritual conversation. It was unbelievable. And I felt like, you know how when you get to know someone, when you're making a new friend, it takes years sometimes and months. And, you go out for tea and you do this. But this I felt like catapulted us into a very deep relationship very quickly. Yeah. Is that how you remember it?
No, not quite. And your memory is probably a lot more valid and reliable than mine. No, I don't remember calling you about the wedding. I just don't, because just is in such a distraught state.
Yeah.
What I do remember is going to Vancouver. Okay, so John died on September 29th, 2000. And then I was at home for
Our wedding was November 5th.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so then I was in Vancouver visiting friends in early December 2000, and I wanted to come and see you, Nathaniel, because I knew I'd missed your wedding. So I wanted to come, and the bridge was icy because there was a bit of snow, and it was so icy. So I was at my friend David Nancy's, and I remember vividly. This is the conversation I remember. We may have had that first conversation that you're saying, but I just don't remember that. But this conversation was the deep one, and that's I remembered. And I called you and I said, something to the effect of, because this was pre-text, right, is that I can't come visit you. This was the plans to, but we can talk on the phone. Or you'd said, well, let's just chat on the phone. At any rate, it turned into this huge conversation. So John would have been gone less than 3 months, and I was still a basket case. And we had such a powerful discussion about life and death and life after death and spirituality and Christianity. And I remember asking you, very much about good and evil. And that's one of the things that stuck out with me. And I touched upon it in my book. It's like, you were like, oh no, I don't believe in those kind of sort of like, whoa, paradigms of good and evil. It's like, there's love and there's fear, and the lack of fear. And then, we talked a lot about the really deep stuff. And I remember what you said, because I was in such fragile, vulnerable state. I remember what you said, and a lot of it really, really resonated with me on a very soul level and very heart level. And I'd say it almost like took a pivot. It pivoted me in a little bit new direction, one that I definitely had to go in, because I was very, very confused. Understandably, right? My soul had been shattered. My heart was broken, and I was very disoriented when we spoke, because my heart is like just in pieces because I've lost John, but also too, I was surrounded by a lot of Christians, and I was surrounded by my father, who was an atheist, and I was surrounded by all these different viewpoints being dropped into a very, very fragile state in my psyche. And I was getting very, very confused. So it was time to get out of Calgary, get away for a little bit. And so your conversation was the spark of a sort of a pivot point in getting into a new direction of better thinking. I still went downhill for another couple months, absolutely, but it all is just, it was a process, and you were a big part of that process, and that was interesting. It was probably one of our first, or if not the first, then the second conversation, but it was a doozy.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting now, over 20 years later, to hear your perspective and where you were at, because I can remember the Christianity part, and I was like, what's that all about? I didn't know if you were Christian or, so you found a Jew who wasn't raised with any religion to talk to, so maybe that was a different perspective. Yes. And just for those listening and watching, Maryanne is a prolific public speaker, and she talks a lot about this. I mean, how many times have you given talks about this loss?
Well, I guess probably hundreds, but it just depends, what angle I'm going to speak about. So for years, I did a lot of workplace safety presentations. So I'd have to talk about the circumstances that led to John's death and just touch upon the emotional and psychological impact, whereas less so going into the really, really deep psychological, spiritual, emotional journey of my grief. I gave a lot of those, like dozens of those probably over the years, and a lot of those would have been to victim services units at police departments, where you speak to volunteers who were supporting people who are going through a traumatic incident, just right after a traumatic incident. So I've given dozens and dozens of presentations, and it's part of the healing process. I mean, between writing about John's death, writing about the psychological ramifications, the emotional impacts of John's death, the actual structural circumstances that led to his death, the whole workplace safety side of things. Many presentations over the years, which is good in the long run. Good long run in terms of it helps me heal, because that and all the writing I do, I mean, I'm so far past that now. I mean, those days of healing, I'm safe to say, I think are fairly complete. There's always still nuggets that I'm still learning, depending on what I'm working on. But in the early days, I remember regarding the writing, because it took me 8 years to write A Widow's Awakening, and my mom was a psychiatric nurse. And
Mhm.
she was very concerned that I was staying stuck in the grief, and she was absolutely right. So in a way, it kept me behind, but in a way, it helped me heal more fully, so that when I did
Yeah.
come out of it, I could just charge ahead. And that's
Yes.
why I am
Yes.
in the good emotional place that I am, and now psychological place too. And then the public speaking piece didn't begin until the book came out in 2008. And that's when I had no idea there'd be so many presentations. I mean, I
Yeah.
always hated, dreaded, avoided at all costs public speaking. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I have to sell this book. And we were doing all this good work with the Memorial Fund in terms of raising public education, public
Yeah.
awareness about workplace safety. So I had to do all these presentations. And I was like, holy cow, it's a good thing I've had 8 years to grieve and sort it
Yes.
out on the page before I start
Yes.
speaking publicly about it. Because if I was standing up there being traumatized every time, I mean, I'm not going to last, right?
No, no. So I'm sure at this point, people that don't know your story are wondering, how did John die? Just
Right.
the background, talk about
Yeah.
how you met John and, the whole thing and what he was all about him.
Right. Okay. Well, John and I met when we were like pups. We were about 20 years old. So we got drunk in a bar, met in Calgary, the usual scene, right? And so we were
Yeah.
together for 4 years, had lots of fun. Then we moved to British Columbia together because I'd had my degree at that point, and then he got his degree in criminology in BC. So we had 4 years together there. Then went back to Calgary and had 4 years. So it's kind of nicely evenly chunked. So we were basically together for 12 years as a couple. And for those years, we were married. And those same 4 years, he was a police officer. So John's dream had always been to become a police officer. So it took him 8 years to get on with the Calgary Police Service, which is what he always wanted. And then he got on, and we were married right within like sort of 3 months, 6 months, somewhere around in there time frame. So he became a police officer, and then we were back in Calgary at this point. And so here's his career is going like this. He has achieved his dream of becoming a police officer. Now he's in the daily grind of being a police officer, which is really tough. And so he was doing that, and we were a young married couple. We had a dog. We were thinking about a family. John was pretty much on the fence, going, "Nope, not feeling like I want to bring a kid into this world after seeing everything
Yeah.
as a police officer." And I was like, "Well, I really don't want one, but I'm 32 years old, so maybe we should giddy up on that." But I really, really always wanted to be a writer, and I kept putting it off, So that sort of fast forwards us through the first 12 years together. And then we were 32 years old. And then in September, 2000, we'd had an argument about me not writing. And I'm like, well, I just wish that I could stay home and write all day. So the long and short of it is, John went to work. We'd had a really good holiday in Disneyland. John went to work one night, and he was investigating a break and enter at a warehouse. So he went into like just a normal warehouse, and he went up to the mezzanine level, and he was taking a step. He was searching the building. They thought was an intruder in there. So he was searching the building, and he took a step from a safe surface to what looked like another safe surface, but it wasn't. It was a false ceiling because there was no safety railing in place. So he stepped right through the false ceiling, dropped like a sack of hammers, right? Fell into the lunchroom below. The back of his legs hit a chair that was right beneath him. So that projected his upper body backwards, and the back of his head hit the ground with such a force that he instantly had major brain injury. So he stopped breathing, and the canine officer found him in the lunchroom, started him breathing again, which was an incredible gift, because even though John himself didn't survive, it two things. It meant that John could donate his organs, including his heart, to a 53-year-old man. But more importantly to me at the time was that it meant that I could spend the whole day with John in the ICU.
Yeah.
So I got to spend a whole day with him. Worst day of my life. Last day of John's, I held his hand. I said goodbye. I like literally hundreds and hundreds of police officers and family and friends, my family, my friends, John's family, my friends. Calgary was our hometown. It was an ICU. It was just like a steady stream of people, right? So they quickly established this rule. The nursing staff did. They said, look, just 3 people. So Maryanne plus 3 others. So it wasn't a shit show. It wasn't a gong show, but it was like a lot of people filing through. So I just lay my head on his chest, held his hand, and comforted him as he died. So they kept him on life support for that day, and that meant that he could donate those organs. So at the end of that day, literally, I woke up just like a normal person going to work. By the end of the day, I went home a widow and left John in the hospital for his organ removal surgery. So right before he died, I had said, blah, 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 whinging about not being able to stay at home and work and be a writer and stuff like that. And I had to go to a job like a normal person. And he's like, well, until you take your writing seriously, nobody else ever will. He says, it's up to you. You want to get writing, you better write. So 2 weeks after he died, a little bit traumatized to say the very least, I started writing A Widow's Awakening. I got the message. It was a little late, but I got it. So because another piece of the puzzle is because John died in the line of duty as a police officer in Canada, that means I received his wage. So I basically got what I wanted, and I also lost the love of my life. Well, one of the loves of my life. Hopefully there's more.
Yeah.
But he was definitely a soulmate in every sense of the word, I would say. And so I took the opportunity given to me, and I never went back to my job, and I started writing, and I worked on A Widow's Awakening. And then the other piece of the puzzle was that the three recruit classmates in John's recruit class from the police started the John Metropolis Memorial Fund and asked me, when you're sort of okay enough, do you want to start working with us, and we'll figure out what we want to do with this money? Because they made these little pins with John's regimental and raised a whole bunch of money. So I said, yeah, absolutely. So we started doing that within 6 months to a year. And then fast forward 23 years later, the John Metropolis Memorial Fund is still going strong. We raised public awareness about workplace safety issues facing first responders, and also basically we've expanded our scope now to include workplace safety for all workers. So we just raise awareness about a lot of the different issues. So that's what I do with the workplace safety side of things, the Memorial Fund, and then there's the writing side. So somewhere in there, I became a screenwriter and a playwright, and I write books and I write blogs, and it's absolutely my passion. And John's death gave me a tremendous gift of the financial freedom to do what I want to do. So I mention all that because it's been a huge part of my grieving process. So the reason, I think, a significant reason of why I am so happy, and as you as a therapist can witness that I'm not just faking it, I am a genuine.
You are literally the happiest person I have ever met.
I'm joyful, but I also, I think a big reason for that is because I'm living my purpose. I'm doing what I'm here to do. And I've taken a really, really horrible circumstance and a tremendous loss and done my best to work with other people who care to make change, right? And whether that's with workplace safety or whether that's with my writing, and it's just like, it makes a difference. So when I wake up in the morning, yeah, it's hard work, but it's work I love. And it's not holding on to the past. It's using an incident from the past to propel towards a better future for a lot of people, And
it's, the topic of death and loss. I mean, it affects all of us.
It does.
Yeah, we're all going to die. I mean, the only things we can count on are birth, death, and taxes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we do in the West, I think much more so than some of the Eastern cultures and religions. There's such a taboo subject about death. And it's like, wow. And I'll tell you, it's not working in our favor. At 32, all of a sudden, I'm like, all I'd lost was my grandma. And I didn't handle that very well when I was 18. Yeah. All of a sudden, I'm like, I felt so alone and confused. I'm like, well, if John's dead, is he dead, or is his soul still live on? And how does this work? And how does that mesh with a Christian paradigm that I was raised in? And John was a very strong Christian. And it's like, whoa, so many questions. And it's like, I don't think it has to be that. I don't think our spiritual awakening as a human being has to come from tragedy. I think it can come.
No. No, it's not. But it kind of reminds me about, in the 12-step program, sometimes they say you have to hit rock bottom. I don't believe that. And it's not based on the experiences of many, thank goodness. But I mean, if you do have these horrific traumas and losses and awful circumstances, I personally, choose growth. And there's post-traumatic growth, which is a big buzzword these days, and you are such an example of that. I think, we talk about trauma, big T trauma, little t trauma. This was a big T trauma, absolutely. To lose someone so young, you were so young, such a senseless death as well. It was a workplace safety accident situation. I mean, it's got all the markers for big T trauma. And, and it sounds like when you were coming out of it, maybe because of the culture that you were raised in and living in, people maybe couldn't hold a space for such a big loss, do you think?
Well, wow, this is a huge subject because who
Yeah.
we're surrounded by when we're going through a massive grieving process like that is really significant. And,
Yeah.
I kind of think I probably was one of the luckiest people on the planet, to be honest. I would say everybody, not everybody, everybody I chose to keep close to me held space. So let me give you a few examples. My best friend, Kristen, I went off the deep end psychologically, and she was the only person that I felt comfortable telling everything to. And I
Yeah.
did like everything, like, whoa, this is what I'm thinking. I just was like off the rails. And she's like, okay, well, it's possible that's true, or it might just be part of the process, but it doesn't matter because it's where you're at and it's okay. So there's a perfect
Right.
example of someone's holding space for me.
Excellent.
Another person was John's Sergeant Rick Gardner. He was the family liaison as well too, and we would go for coffee after coffee after coffee. And he was so good about just listening, and he could share with me what happened that night. We'd go over it over and over and over again because he was actually on scene. He was there in the lunchroom, right?
Amazing.
And and he would just be listening, and we would talk about all these spiritual questions and stuff. And again, and my brother, all my brothers were phenomenal. I have 4 of them, but Doug in particular, he's the one of my older brothers, and he and his wife Tracy, they were so good because they were the ones I would say the universe put into place in my home for the first few weeks.
Yeah.
So Doug literally moved into my house and
Wow.
cooked food for me, fed me, watered me, answered all my questions. And I'd be like, what does soulmate mean to you? And he's like, I don't know. But I'm like, yeah, but you're here. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want the Christian answer. I don't want some spiritual guru's answer. I want your answer because you're the one who's in my realm right now. And sure enough, the words of wisdom that he offered me just were just incredible. And same with his wife Tracy and all my family and my brother. Again, holding space, the financial piece, Esther, that's huge after the death of a young person, right? So my brother George, my brother Pat, these guys were able to help me in different ways, hold space for me in terms of, one brother might be better to talk to about spiritual stuff. Another brother or my dad might be better to talk to more about more pragmatic matters, or, you know what I mean? So I sort of look back, to be honest, is that I feel that even though there was a lot of people, I could fairly quickly tell who are like, yeah, I appreciate that, but we're not on the same wavelength and it's not really resonating very much. So, just sort of put a little bit of a distance, but a lot of people were able to be there. So when I did hit rock bottom, which I really did in January, for 3 months after John's death, I knew who to call and to be there. So but that's a huge piece of what I think that we need to communicate with in this podcast. It's like, oh, wow, be very careful who you surround yourself with and who you choose to listen to, right? And be supportive. The people are in your life, but if you don't have someone to talk to, then for God's sakes, get a therapist, get a grief counselor, get a group grief session, whatever it is, to help guide you and coach you and support you through the worst time of your life. Because none of us can do it alone. It's not possible. The trauma is too deep.
Yeah. God, that's great. Yeah, I'm hoping that people that have had a big loss that are listening to this there's so much wisdom in there. I hope that they're gleaning that. So now I know that you've also experienced a lot more loss. You're a huge animal lover, and you, since I've known you, almost always had 1 or 2 dogs, and now is the longest stretch I've seen you without a dog. But you've dealt with the loss of many animals as well as people, more people, quite a few people on top of that. I've watched you go through the loss of John's mom, your own mom, your father. Who else have you lost since?
Well, I'd say that's enough.
Yeah.
Those are, and the big 3 dogs, right? Sable, Soda, and Sadie. And the reason why those dogs were such a significant loss to me, probably right up there with losing John, to be perfectly frank. Not as much, but the next down. Like my mom and dad, grieving my mom and dad were difficult, but they were old people and they'd lived their life, and I'd come to peace with my relationship with them. Very different. Stable
Yes.
Soda and Sadie, again, yeah, they were all old dogs, and I was okay letting them go. But the grief was really, really extensive, and here's why. Because grieving isn't just about people, right? Esther, you know that of all people.
Oh, people
Grief,
grieve over animals. I find the grief seems more intense over animals than people sometimes.
well, yep, that's not what I was going to say. I was going to say it's not just grieving the loss of a person. In John's death, for example, I didn't just lose him. I lost the dream. I lost the having the marriage and the
Yeah.
love of my life and sharing my life with someone, and I lost having a family with him.
Yes.
So those dogs were the closest thing I've ever had to having kids. And in hindsight, really, as you know, losing your beautiful cats, like, wow, when we sign up to care for an animal for 10, 12, 13 years, that's not a lot of time. So it's
No.
like, wow, you feel kind of ripped, but it is what it is. They've got shorter lifespans. But I'm just saying that the grief of the dogs is very much connected to the loss of John, because that put me on a different life path, which meant I didn't have kids. And even though I was okay with not having kids, and I did come to peace with that, absolutely, and I actively chose not to have them after John died, the fact of the matter is I had to love someone. And since I didn't have any luck getting a guy in my life, I had those dogs to love. So their loss was just so impactful. It was really, really, really hard. It was just this horrible grief. So yeah, grief comes in many different forms, and it lingers longer. And it's like, it's so funny. It's like everybody has such a different experience with their pets and a different experience with their mom and their dad or their loved one or their kid. Like I remember, this is interesting. I remember thinking after John's death, like people would say to me is like, well, I'm sorry you lost your husband, but it's not as bad as losing a child. And I'm like,
Oh my
Kate,
God.
Kate, that is the cruelest thing you could have said to me, because you've just made grief a pissing match, and you have no idea.
Compare pain. Don't compare.
You can't compare it like that. I mean, of course, losing a child is horrible, but we're not comparing this. This is not an apples against apples, whose grief is worse game. Like, how could you say that to someone who has hurt so much? And B, I don't get to lose a child because I just lost the guy I was going to have the child with.
Yeah,
so you couldn't have said something worse to me. And yet people don't say it to be mean. They're saying it to try and say it could be worse. And it's like, you know what? This is my worst. Okay. I know this is my worst. You need, like you say, the word space. You need to let me have the space to acknowledge the depth of my loss. Don't you dare minimize it by saying it could be worse. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes. And I just wanted to add, as a therapist, that I hear these stories so often in my practice from my clients who've had a big loss, is because our culture, we're going back to this idea that our culture is so terrible with death, and we're not really skilled in this area. People just want to comfort you. They don't know what to do when there's great suffering, deep, great suffering. People don't know what to do. And so my advice to anyone out there, if you don't know what to do when someone is grieving a big loss, don't do anything. That's better than doing something stupid, like saying, comparing a child, losing a child to your husband. Don't do anything, bite your lip, or just ask that person, just be there with them in that moment. And just sit with that person, go into the pit with them, sit there and just be quiet. And eventually you might want to ask that person, what do you need? Is there anything I can do? That's about the best you can. What do you think?
Absolutely. The greatest gift that we can give each other as humans, and the greatest gift especially that we can give when we're going through a loss, is to just shut up and listen. And yet, do you know what? That's the hardest thing for people to do. They want to fix it. They want to say the right thing.
And you, as one of my closest friends, Nathaniel and I were talking about this recently. When I call you and I'm upset about something and I need to talk, I honestly don't know many other people, including therapists, that I've seen who listen as well as you.
that's because I was taught how to listen, and it was Kristen who listened to me after John's death, and she was such a profound listener, and I utilized that. I used her as my go-to person because I knew that it was a safe place for me to talk, and someone wasn't going to just jump in. And she still had great words of wisdom, or I had good questions to ask me, but she was just profoundly a very good listener. So she helped me through my dark time through that. And then when I was through my dark time, and then of course, you know, I've been on the supporting end of many people in my life over the years as they went through a dark time. And
Yes.
now I know how to be a good listener, not because I read it in a book, but because I was modeled on
Yeah.
A, how to be a good listener, and B, I experienced how important it is to have a good listener. So
Yeah.
that's why I am a good listener, because I get it on a very fundamental level. And as I say, it's not an easy skill. It's a very difficult skill to master, but once you get it, it's great because it's a gift that you can give people. It's so funny. Yeah, you know, like we're in a society where so many of the gifts are material, and it's like, actually, the greatest gift is probably free. You just have to shut up and listen to someone and support them as they go through a tough time, and ask them good questions that they can help themselves sort through. Wow. It's just incredible to see the miracles happen when we do that for each other.
Yeah. And I would add to that, I think it's part of being a good listener is to be fully present.
Yes.
Yeah. To be there,
Yes.
to put all of yourself, 100% of yourself there. And that's what I do as a therapist. And, you know, people are paying me to be there 100% on my game, in the moment with that person. Nothing else matters but what they're going through. And I'm here to help you. And
wow.
Yeah, it is an incredible gift. And I, to learn how to do that, of course, I had to do years of training with masters of, you know, senior therapists who were very skilled in that area. And I learned more and more. The more I get into Buddhism, the more I learn. I've refined those skills. It's not something, I think it did come naturally to me, but I've had to really tweak it over the years to really, you know, be there more and more. And the more, what I found for myself is that the more that I've dealt with my past traumas and worked through those, the more fully I can show up for people who are going through whatever trauma it is.
Oh, wow. That is really cool. Do you want to give an example?
Well, yeah, let's see. Well, for example, since we're talking about death and loss and grief, just some of my own losses. So I've had a number of losses over the past few years. So I was very, very fortunate to be very close to all four of my grandparents. I was the only grandchild until I was 14, 15. I have one cousin that came along when I was 14, and then I have a half sister came along when I was oh no, I was 15 when my cousin came along, and then I was 16 when my sister came along. But up until then, I had four grandparents that just doted on me. It was amazing. I mean, you had all the brothers, you know, you had so many siblings and supports. I had the grandparents. So I could do no wrong with them. It was such a gift. They were my angels. And I was so lucky. They were in England and they were in Edmonton, back and forth. So I spent every summer with these beautiful people that just lavished all this love on me. And it was just incredible. So I felt like very, very special all the time I was with them. So they gave me such a gift. And I lost them sequentially. My dad's parents were much older than my mother's parents. So I lost both of them within 1 year when I was 25, 26. And that was hard and it was sad, but they were 89, you know, they died of natural causes and there was no big trauma there. So, you know, very, very sad. But then my mother's parents, who I was very close to, I was very close to them, mainly because they lived in Canada a lot of the time. Then they moved back to England, but my other grandparents lived in England, so I saw more of them. But my grandfather, Mel, I lost him in my 30s, I guess, and that was really hard. I was very close to him. And then my granny Ruth was my I don't know, we just had this unbelievable bond. She was only 48 when I was born. So she was kind of like, she said I was like her fourth child. And
Right.
she basically, I felt like, helped raise me. And she lived till she was 95, which is beautiful. And I was 45 when I last saw her, 47 when she passed. And that was the hardest thing that was awful. Losing my Granny Ruth. She was like the matriarch of the family. I've written about her. You can check out lots of blogs. And she was a Holocaust refugee from Latvia. She was just the most incredible survivor. And we just had this bond. We were simpatico. I think our personalities, I felt like she really, really got me.
Yeah, got you. Yeah.
So, yeah. So losing her was awful. That was just awful. And and then I lost my two beloved cats, Abe and Ike, Siberian cats that I'd had for 13 and 16 years. And that was, grieving an animal. I mean, I hadn't had pets since I was a kid. And that was horrendous. And I, again, like you, chose not to have kids. And those babies, they were my babies. I called them my babies. Got them when I was 35 because my body wanted babies, but my head didn't. So I got these cats and I infantilized them and I made them into my babies, my human, and they acted like people. Like, it was bizarre. And the bond I had with them was tremendous. And losing them, when I lost Abe, who was my baby, he was the last one to go, I threw myself on top of him. This is in the vet's clinic, and sobbed. I have never cried like that in my life. Like it was wailing, like just primal wailing, screaming, crying, beating the table. I'm sure it freaked Nathaniel out, but that was big. And then most recently, my father-in-law, Alan, died.
Yes.
And to watch, I was very, very close to him, and he was 84, but it still felt way too soon. And then being there for Nathaniel after losing his father, it's broken my heart when you see the person that you love the most going through that kind of pain. It's so awful. So I guess I've just, and I'm 51. Like now people are dying, people are getting sick. And it's just a normal thing that people die and animals die. But I feel like I can now, when I'm dealing with a grieving client, I have much more capacity to hold the space. Usually silence, a lot of silence for that kind of raw animal like pain, guttural, it's so deep, so deep. And
Well, I'll just jump in there, and I want to make a comment, and I want to hear what you have to say about this. The pain and the trauma is so deep. So when, in my circumstance, when John died when I was 32, and it was horrific circumstances, and there was a lot of my own shit dealt with and suddenly brought to the surface, like, oh my God, like I wanted to be a writer. Now his death has given me the chance to be a writer, and the guilt that goes with that, and the confusion. And is this part of a divine plan, or is it all just randomly unfolding? All these huge big, and that's why it's called, my book's called The Spiritual, a Widow's Awakening, because I'm just awakened. I'm like, what is going on here? And why does everyone else seem to be sound asleep? But
you definitely had a spiritual awakening. I can attest to that.
But my question to you is this, is that when I say it's deep, I mean like soul deep. Like my trauma took years to fully come to the surface, years to fully process. And this is me actively processing. I'm not running from stuff. I am working my way through it. I am doing good work in the world to try and make, good come out of a tragedy. I'm doing all my writing, and of course, but everything that I've chosen to work with helps me heal. It also keeps me a little bit stuck in there because I'm doing such intense work, but that's okay. At the end, it's worth it. But my point is this, is that the depth of the hurt is so so fundamental to our very being.
Yeah.
I often, like, this is where I'm kind of curious about your perspective, and I'm not sure if you can speak from your personal experience or from your professional experience, and in terms of your education, your training, and your dealing with clients, whichever you choose. But the point is, you come packaged with a whole bunch of experience, right? And it's really interesting for me to watch other widows going through their grief journey, because I I'm on Twitter a lot and stuff like that, and I'm really curious about people and to support people one-on-one who are going through a terrific journey. And it's like, I remember when John died, people would be like, "Oh, geez, you kind of got a year." You know what I mean? They don't say that, but there's sort of that, unwritten sort of thought that you've sort of got a year, and then you can try and start get your life getting back.
Right. Then you're supposed to be over it.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, it takes a lot longer than that. But I kind of just wonder, how long should it take? Like, I mean, I'm talking, like, I would say probably 15, 16, 17 years is how long it took for my soul to fully heal, because I chose such an active, okay, well, while we're in there, we may as well just unearth everything and get everything sorted with. Like, this
Right.
job death was the start of it. But I kind of, my point is, I see a lot of
So
people.
wait, I just want to ask, Maryanne, are you referring to other traumas in your life that you hadn't processed?
No, I'm talking about John's death, because I'm just curious. Like, I see other people, widows, going through it, and even me, who's gone through everything that I went through and processed his death as fully as I could, and I'm still writing about it. I look at people and they're, posting comments and stuff about, oh, I miss my deceased husband, and he's been gone for 8 years, and I miss him every day and stuff. And I'm like, wow, like, that makes me sad. And yet I'm like, I get it, because I've been there. Like, I don't miss John now. I honestly, I don't. I'm fully processed and healed, and I've learned how to kind of find him in my consciousness when I need him, and I've learned what I can from it, and I get it. It's just, it's okay. Like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing here, and he's not here, and that's that. But I look at everyone else and I kind of wonder, there is no time frame for how long these things take. But in your experience, like this deep, deep trauma to the soul, I think it takes a tremendously long time to fully process. And that's not to say that we can't fall in love again and move on and have kids and do everything we need to do. But on some level, I think that healing takes an awful long time.
Yeah.
And I kind of think, it's so easy to judge others going, oh my God, like, quit talking about your dead husband. I mean, I've been there. I'm allowed to say that, right? And people do. But it's kind of like, is that part of the healing? Or I'm just curious about you as a therapist. I'm curious about the depth of hurt. What's your take on that? What kind of can you offer people? You know what I mean? Like, it's not just me, but I mean other listeners, because I'm sure everyone's kind of wondering, if they haven't gone through a horrific loss, they might not be quite so aware of how deep that hurt goes.
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I want to preface everything I'm saying by saying I'm not a trauma specialist. That's not my expertise. I'm also not a grief and loss specialist. So I'm sure there's other therapists that could be much more poignant on these topics than me. But and if you're out there and you want to talk to us, come on this podcast, just let me know. I'd love to interview you. Yeah. But, coming back to, because I work so much with temperament, talking about highly sensitive people, that's my specialty. I think there's so much biological differences between us, physiological and temperamental differences are how our nervous systems are wired. I think we're all very, very different in how we process emotions and thoughts and sensations in our body. And some people, the highly sensitive people, I would hazard a guess that, are going to have much more profound experiences of grief and loss. They'll be very deep and might take a lot longer maybe than most people, based on the fact that their physiology is wired to be on high alert all the time, and that they've got these spidey senses. I mean, here you're a highly sensitive person. Do you think that might be part of why it took you, how long it took you, maybe?
Yes, that is another piece of the puzzle that I haven't quite put together consciously yet, but absolutely, it's because I'm just highly sensitive being a
Yeah.
highly sensitive person is fairly new on my radar only in the last few years, so yeah, I kind of am curious about that, because now I'm applying the lens of what I know about myself now to the lens of the person that I was, which was, for
Yeah.
heaven's sakes, almost 23 years ago, right? I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, so yeah, you're absolutely right, because sometimes I'm like, wow, people, I just see them as like so resilient, and I'm admiring of that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, like, I mean, I'm resilient and I'm tough and I've done lots of great things, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie about the fact that it just seems so long to be able
Yeah.
to fully
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate your honesty, and I'm sure people listening and watching also appreciate the honesty.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I was going to say, I think in terms of um, traumas are kind of cumulative as well. So I'm sort of thinking maybe it's different for different people depending on how
Mhm.
many traumas that they've had previously to
Right.
this one,
Right.
and have they worked through those traumas,
Right.
because it's a compounding effect. They just trauma added to trauma to trauma.
Right.
Um, so if one person has never experienced a major trauma and then all of a sudden their pet dies, they might have a very different reaction than someone who has had multiple traumas, hasn't been able to resolve those, and then has
Mhm.
a loss on top of that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It's all where the starting line is, and how your nervous system is wired.
Yeah.
So I think that would have an effect as well. And whether you have resources,
Yeah.
whether you have
Yeah.
community, like
Yeah.
you were saying, basically in your story, that having all these people around you,
Yeah.
the right kind of people, was key.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah.
think of people that don't have anybody to lean on. I mean, that's going to
Yeah.
be a whole different scenario, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Grief can
Yeah.
be a very, very lonely place.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm conscious of your time here. I just want to end with, maybe some top tips that you have for people that have had a recent loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
What would you advise them to do, to not do? I mean, you've covered some of that, but
Yep, some of it. I would say, in terms of top tips for what people need to do, is number one is to take care of yourself, and only the individual knows what that means. So whether that is something as simple as hot baths, massages, going out and getting exercise, which of course
yeah,
is hugely important, right? Getting out and getting the fresh air and going on
yeah.
walks and stuff. Take care
But
of
those
yourself.
are all things of being in the body, being, yeah,
Absolutely,
connected to the
absolutely.
body.
And then also, as part of this, I suppose, is caring for yourself, is surrounding yourself with the right people. So getting those resources in place. And so being really discerning with who you allow yourself to be around during those very sacred healing times, right? Choose people who will listen to you, who won't judge you, who are going to love you and support you, not enable you if you're starting to embark upon addictive
Yes.
coping mechanisms. You want people who will stand up to the plate, right? And be there as a true friend, not just a party friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So you choose wisely who you surround yourself with. Listen to your intuition, listen to your gut, take time for yourself, start to get those maybe the more psychological coping skills. You've got the physical ones, but all the psychological ones, such as, the meditation, the yoga. I wish I started yoga a lot sooner. Meditation was just like, did not work for me. My God, it's like, giving a kid a machine gun. I mean, I didn't have the skills to meditate, and I wasn't in a place to learn yet, but that does come. But anyways, just doing what you can to calm that mind, lift your spirits, figure out what brings you some joy,
Right.
and do that a lot. Not pleasure necessarily, like don't be eating and drinking and smoking crack
Yeah.
too much, because that's not,
Or at all.
or at all. That's not the road you want to go down. But things like funny movies, being with animals, being with kids,
Yes.
getting
Yeah.
out, and not necessarily going to parties. Those were a little bit disastrous for me. I'll talk about that in a second. But
Yeah.
doing things that genuinely bring you joy, like having a friend over and watching a funny movie, and just
Yeah.
figuring out, and you figure out real quick, okay, that felt good, that didn't. And for example,
Yeah.
some people do want to be around, and they just want to be at parties around social, and they don't necessarily want to be talking about what they're experiencing. just want to be around people. And that's fine if that works for you. Now, for me, that didn't, because all it meant was that we weren't talking about John. And all I wanted to in those early days was talk about him and keep him alive and sort out what I was experiencing. So then that brings me to the third piece, which is probably the most important, is, you know, get the professional help you need, and talk to a therapist, a grief counselor, get someone who is a pro in your court, unless you're blessed enough to have family and friends that will do the trick. Most people are not equipped to handle someone going through a really, really big loss if they're starting to have some serious struggles emotionally and psychologically, right? Like, let's face it, that obviously you pros exist for a very good reason. It's really a a huge skill set that you've got, and a very highly experienced, and you're highly trained, right? So I would strongly recommend people get the professional help they need. And that's really, really important, because it's going to fast track you. You can't speed up that deeper healing, but you can choose the healthy coping mechanisms. You can choose a professional who can help guide you in the right kind of direction that you need to go, and you're going to get where you want to go. Perhaps not faster, but in a lot more healthy way, right? Because the coping mechanisms are very, very alluring, right? Like to be drinking too much, to be whatever addictive thing, to sex,
jumping into bed with someone else.
Oh dear God, yes, because especially as a widow, what I was after was exactly what I lost. Oh, I just want that intimacy again, right? So look out, right? And if it wasn't actually having sex with men, it was mentally fantasizing about wanting to have a relationship with them. And that's where I went a lot of times in my head, and wanting to have relationships with John's police friends, because the connection and the bond was so strong. And they were just like, they wanted to just be friends and support me, and I always wanted more. And that was my road and my journey, but we all find our own path. But the point is, top tips, does that kind of cover it? You know, looking after yourself physically, looking after yourself emotionally, psychologically, getting the help you need, eating properly, and then start to do joy. And then the number 4 thing, and I would say this probably should be bumped up higher, but it's everyone's jam, is figure out your purpose. Like, you know, we all go through loss, but to be able to not necessarily turn that loss around, you don't have to work directly with that, but if you can find meaning in your day, and not shopping, not you know, using alcohol, not partying, not that kind of stuff. But if you can find purpose and meaning, whatever it is, that building a garden, you know what I mean? You know, tutoring a kid, whatever it is that can bring some meaning and purpose to your life. And that's very different than alcoholism, or workaholism is what I wanted to say, is that's very different from that throwing yourself into work. And I mean, I fell for that too, right? Like workaholism is a tricky one, because we think we're healing, we think we're making the world a better place, we think we're turning tragedy into triumph, we think we're turning a bad
thing rewarded, I think.
Oh yeah, workaholism. And then you realize, you're like, oh great, so I just spent 12 hours, you know, just sitting at my computer. Is that really healthy? Is that an honor to my loved one? You know what I mean? Like, so it's like you figure it out. But purpose, having some sort of contribution to give. And the 5th thing is figure out a way that you can honor the person you've lost. And that's a very, very personal, intimate thing, and a very individual thing. That could be like,
sometimes that can be very private as well.
Very private, absolutely, for heaven's sakes. I mean, mine's a very public memorial fund, but you know, you could have a bench, you could have a garden, you could have a little photo shrine, you could have whatever you want, but something that honors that person, whether it's a scholarship, maybe, whatever it is, you know, if that's important to you, just a little way of figuring it out. And even, like you say, private, and it can be something as beautiful as saying, you know what, my loved one used to love to work with kids or something. So, you know, implementing something like that into your life, not keeping their dream necessarily going just because of that, just because they died, but some way of incorporating that into, so you're taking the essence of them and what they loved and incorporate it into your own life. And that's what I've done with John's death. And I gotta say, it really, really works. It's like you sort of keep a little part of them alive, not in a creepy, weird, bad, he's lurking in my closet kind of way, but in a loving kind of way. Does that make sense?
I feel like I know him really well by being around you. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, was there another part to that question?
No, I think that's beautiful. I think that really is beautiful. And I think we can wind up here.
Okay.
Thank you, Maryanne. I know everybody listening to this will be grateful for your wisdom and
I
your
hope
story.
so. And
Yeah,
yours too. Thank you.
yeah, yeah.